In my last video, we spoke about the recent tax changes which hit UK citizens, but there are some misconceptions out there. For example, say you have the following tax bands. You may think that every time you cross a threshold, you will be charged at the corresponding rate on your whole income. So for example, if you earn 60k, you might think, well, you should be charged 40% of 60k. Now that's wrong. Otherwise, imagine what might happen. Say you earn 49k and your employer gives you a promotion and a 2k rise. So before you'd be paying 20% of 49k and after 40% of 51k. If that were the case, you might not want that promotion after all. In reality, however, you only get taxed on the part exceeding the threshold. So if someone were to ask you, what's your tax rate? Well, you might struggle to answer that. Is it 20% because most of your tax is in the 20% bracket? Or is it 40% because that is the threshold you've crossed and currently charged at? Well, the 40% rate is known as your marginal tax rate because every additional income is taxed at that rate, hence the marginal name. The answer to the question therefore should be a blended rate or the average rate. And to work this out, you simply take the total taxes divided by total income. Now, we're not doing this just to produce another meaningless statistic, but rather to reflect the true burden of taxation. In other words, it's your effective tax rate, and we'll use this term rather than average tax rate, as the latter can be confused with the national average tax rate, which is a different calculation. And here's why the effective tax rate is important. Tax rate, threshold, and tax-free allowances differ across countries. So how can you compare them? Say you wanted to find out where your tax burden would be the lowest with a fairly normal income. Well, the effective tax rate is a good metric to start with. For example, you could take the median income, that is the income level whereby half of the population earns less than that, and work out the effective tax rate. So for example, let's compare the effective tax rate at median salaries for Scotland and Wales. In Wales, with a median income of 28,506, the effective tax rate was 11.2%, whereas in Scotland, the median income was 31,672, and the average tax rate was 12.18%. To be clear, this figure also reflects national insurance contributions. But hang on, if the lowest tax bracket is 19% in Scotland and 20% in the rest of the UK, how come the effective tax rate is well below that? Well, that's because you need to account for tax-free allowances like your personal allowance. Now, let's move on to something more interesting. What happens to the effective tax rate as your income increases? Clearly, it would increase, but how quickly? Here's a graph of the effective tax rate on annual income up to 170k. The figure is for last year's income tax year, that is for 22-23. This tax year's curve looks slightly different because of the changes in the tax thresholds mentioned in my last video. Generally, however, you can see how the tax burden is much lower on the lower income earners, in fact much lower than the 20% basic rate even. In fact, you wouldn't really pay 20% tax until you earn about 60k. Similarly, you wouldn't really pay 40% tax until you hit 275k, although your effective tax rate would have spiked closer to that level much earlier. Now, what you also see is 5 distinctive gradients in the curve. First down here is where your effective tax rate is 0% because your earnings are very low. The second part is where the curve starts to rise when people pay the basic 20% income tax rate up to about 50k. The third phase is where the higher tax rate kicks in, but up to 100k. The fourth phase is between 100k and about 125k. That's where there's a hike in the effective tax rate, not because of your marginal tax rate changes, it's still 40%, but in that range you start losing your tax-free personal allowance. Some people refer to it as the 60% tax rate. Finally, from 125k onwards, you're on the additional tax rate of 45%. And that's why you see the effective tax rate converge towards that value. Now, to put this effective tax rate into even better perspective, let's overlay the UK income distribution. I'm using data from the Office for National Statistics to show this reverse cumulative income distribution. It may seem a little tricky to read, so let me walk you through. The line shows the level of income versus the proportion of taxpayers who earn more than this level. For example, 99% of taxpayers earn more than 12k, 70% earn more than 20k, and 10% earn more than 60k. You can pause the video here and read the graph for any other values you have in mind. Now, the reason I want to overlay this graph over the effective tax rate is to compare the proportion of the population and their corresponding tax rates. So here, for example, you can see that at the 20k income level, 70% earn more than this level, which corresponds to a 7.5% effective tax rate. In other words, 70% of UK taxpayers have a tax burden of more than 7.5%. Looking at 40k, 25% of the population have a tax burden greater than 13%. Similarly, you can deduce that 10% have a tax burden greater than 19%. That's people earning more than 60k. 3% of taxpayers have a tax burden greater than 27% as they earn more than 100k. And 1.5% of taxpayers earn more than 160k and had as a result a tax burden greater than 36%. Hence, you see how it puts the true tax rate into perspective. Lower income earners are taxed nowhere near the basic tax rate of 20%. As we just saw for someone earning 20k or less, that is 30% of taxpayers, their effective tax rate was less than 7.5%. On the opposite end of the spectrum, those earning above 160k, that is 1.4% of taxpayers, their effective tax rate would be greater than 36%. So not quite the 45% top rate, but not too far off. That said, it's unlikely that someone earning such high income would not use tax-efficient plans to reduce their present and future tax burdens. These include ISAs, pensions, investment trusts, etc. I've covered this in another video, so please feel free to check them out. The link should be somewhere on the screen as well as in the description. That's it for me. I hope you found this useful, and if you did, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and see you next time.